The sky was too perfect that day. Clear blue stretched smooth like silk overhead, with only the occasional brush of wispy white. The kind of sky that makes you believe the day will end with ice cream and tired laughter. It was the Sunday before school started again, Labor Day weekend 2004, and the Samuels family was headed for Rosedale Park. They'd packed early. Homemade fried chicken, a cooler full of juice boxes, sunscreen that never got used. Patty Samuels had laid out the picnic blanket with a certain quiet pride, the way mothers do when they want the memory to be good. Her husband Gary carried the collapsible chairs, and their two children, Ben and little Molly, ran circles around the car before racing down the hill toward the trees. Ben was 9. He wore his favorite t-shirt, faded navy, with a dinosaur skull on it, and a red baseball cap he rarely took off. He had a way of squinting into the sun like it was a challenge, like even the light couldn't beat him. That day, he brought along a walkie-talkie, an old one Gary had fixed up. Molly had the matching one, though she mostly used it to shout nonsense words until the static answered back. The park was half full. Other families had staked out corners beneath the tall oaks. Radios played Dogs Barked, and somewhere down by the creek, a group of teens smoked and passed a guitar around. It felt like a page from a catalog, colorful, ordinary, easy. The last photo ever taken of Ben was snapped at 2:14 p.m. He was standing on a tree stump, holding the walkie-talkie up like a microphone. Molly is beside him, her smile lopsided, her teeth full of missing places. Behind them, the trees blur slightly the depth of the woods, just beyond visible focus. They thought it would be a good day. Sometime after lunch, Ben asked to go explore. He wanted to look for frogs down by the creek, the one that trickled along the edge of the woods, about 60 yards from their picnic site. Patty hesitated, she always did, but Gary nodded and handed him a small flashlight. "Stay where the path is," he warned, "and keep your walkie-talkie on." Ben saluted, grinned, and ran off with the sound of Molly's voice chasing him through the speaker. "Ben, you're a frog." At 2:36 p.m. the walkie crackled once. Static. Then Ben's voice saw a turtle. Huge. Then nothing. It wasn't odd at first. Kids get quiet when they're busy. The woods were close enough to hear if he called out. Gary opened a soda. Patty passed out cookies. They thought they had time. By 3:10 p.m. she was standing. "Ben," she called, cupping her hands. "Ben, it's cookie time." Molly joined in, laughing, thinking it was a game. 3:18. Gary walked toward the creek. The walkie-talkie was silent. His voice grew sharper. The sun dipped slightly, just enough to make the woods feel bigger. 3:33. Patty was running. When the police arrived 2 hours later, the park was nearly empty. Dusk was bleeding through the trees. A ranger had closed off the trail with yellow tape, more for appearance than effect. Flashlights bobbed through the brush, calling a name that felt heavier each time it was said. They found no footprints, no scraps of fabric, no signs of struggle. Just one thing. Ben's walkie-talkie, turned off, placed upright on a flat rock near the creek's edge, and his red cap was gone. The Samuels never left the area. They sold the house, yes, and moved just 3 miles north, but Patty refused to go farther. She couldn't explain it, only that something told her Ben wasn't gone. Not really. She kept a room for him. Fresh sheets, same books, same dinosaur posters. Once a year, she updated his age on the missing persons flyer. Age progressed to 13, then 15, then 17. Every year, Gary grew quieter. Every year, Molly asked fewer questions. And every year, on Labor Day weekend, Patty would return to Rosedale Park and sit on the same checkered blanket, just in case. In 2021, the house they used to live in was purchased by a retired couple, restoring it room by room. On a rainy morning in September, while tearing down an interior wall to open up the kitchen, they found something. Behind the plaster, between two beams, folded carefully, stuffed deep, a red baseball cap. The initials BS were stitched in black thread under the brim, and something else, something almost too unbelievable to be true. Tucked inside the sweatband was a small strip of fabric from the inside of a walkie-talkie speaker, still smelling faintly of dirt, still waiting. And just like that, everything they thought they knew fell apart. It wasn't until the car was nearly unpacked that someone noticed 3 folding chairs, 1 cooler, a red checkered blanket, 2 frisbees, a half-eaten chocolate cake, but only 3 pairs of shoes. Eli's were missing. Joanna stood still in the middle of the living room, holding her son's half-zipped backpack. His little stuffed raccoon, the one named Roger, dangled from the zipper like a charm. Her husband, Derek, thought maybe Eli had run inside already. Maybe he was in the bathroom. Maybe he got distracted and wandered to the back of the property. But the house was silent. Joanna called his name once, then twice, then louder. Derek opened every closet, checked the garage, jogged down to the neighbor's fence. Nothing. Not a peep, not a shadow, not even a laugh. The same boy who refused to leave the playground without his hat just vanished. The park was 30 minutes away, nestled between 2 wooded trails and an old reservoir. Joanna's mind spun with excuses. He fell asleep in the car, and they forgot impossible. He had been talking, laughing. There were photos on her phone from just an hour before Eli, with cake on his cheek, his arms flung around a tree like it was a friend. They drove back to the park, fast. By the time they arrived, the sun had dropped low. The rangers were still on site packing up trash cans. The picnic area looked cleaner than it had all day. Too clean. Joanna's voice cracked as she asked, "Have you seen a little boy blonde?" "Green hat," answered to Eli. They hadn't. She ran toward the trees. Derek went toward the reservoir. And for the next 2 hours, every trail, every bench, every log and shadow was searched. No hat, no raccoon, no Eli. Police were called by nightfall. Flashlights swept the area. Search dogs came by dawn. Helicopters hovered for 2 days. Volunteers hung posters on poles, trees and mailboxes. A map was pinned in Joanna and Derek's living room with red yarn and pins like something from a movie, but no movie ever lasted this long without a resolution. Joanna stopped sleeping. Derek started drinking. And neighbors, who once asked if they could help, slowly stopped making eye contact. The town of Fairpine, Oregon, had never lost a child before. It was a place where everyone knew your dog's name, where the postman left dog biscuits in the mailbox, where kids rode bikes to school and left them unlocked outside the library. Eli's disappearance wasn't just tragic. It fractured something. Families started walking their kids all the way to the school doors. The park stayed mostly empty that summer. And the reservoir, once a popular fishing spot, became a place kids whispered about but never visited. And still, nothing. Joanna refused to move. Friends suggested a change of scenery might help. But she couldn't imagine waking up in a house that didn't have Eli's handprints in the cement by the garage. She left his room untouched. His books still lined the shelf. His sneakers sat under the bed. His favorite cereal stayed on the grocery list. And every June, on the day of the picnic, she drove to the park. She sat on the same blanket. She brought the same cake. And she waited not for a miracle, but because doing nothing hurt worse. Sometimes the pain was sharp. Other times, it was quiet, but it never left. 17 years passed. Joanna became the woman everyone tiptoed around, the one with the polite smile and tired eyes. Her husband had moved out 5 years ago, not out of hate, just out of hollowness. They still talked sometimes, mostly about the weather, never about Eli. But she always kept his room clean, and she always kept his hat in her memory, forest green, with a little sewn patch of a bear on the front. That was the part that stuck, because when the hat finally returned, it wasn't in the woods. It wasn't in the reservoir. It wasn't in Lost and Found. It was inside the wall. The sound was barely audible, a hollow papery scrape behind the plaster. Joanna had almost ignored it. After all, the basement had always creaked. The house was old, the pipes older, and there was always some sound water, humming through copper wood, shifting with weather, the sigh of time pressing against stone. But this wasn't that. It was dry, soft, repetitive, like something nestled behind the insulation had moved. The remodel hadn't even started. She was just clearing out shelves, sorting old paint cans, and boxes marked X Mass in red Sharpie. She reached for a forgotten photo frame when her elbow nudged the shelf, and it tilted just enough to reveal a seam, a vertical line in the drywall she'd never noticed before. Her heart slowed, then raced. She pressed her ear to the wall. Silence. Then scratch. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. She stared at it, swallowed, and reached for the hammer. The wall crumbled easier than expected. Behind the thin, water-stained drywall was old insulation crumbling and gray packed unevenly around wooden framing. She peeled it back slowly, expecting maybe a mouse nest or the dull gleam of copper piping. Instead, she saw fabric, green, frayed at the edge. She dropped the hammer. It wasn't just any fabric. It was a hat. Her hand moved before she could stop it, trembling, slow, reverent. She pulled it from the wall with 2 fingers, the way someone might lift a sleeping bird. There was mold in the seams. The stitching was faded, but the patch, the bear, was still there. Joanna's knees gave way. She sat clutching the hat, her breath trapped between sob and scream. Inside the brim, written in smudged, childish ink, "Property of Eli." For a moment, time fractured. The cold floor, the hammer, the dust floating in a shaft of sunlight. She was back in the park, holding his hand, hearing him laugh when he beat her in a race to the pond. His voice so clear now, like he was just behind her about to tug her sleeve. But then she saw something else, carved not written into the stiff lining of the hat, as though scraped with a nail or a coin. 3 faint letters. HLP. Help! She pressed the hat to her chest, her fingers numb. What had he been trying to say? She didn't call the police. Not yet. She didn't tell Derek. She didn't tell anyone. That night, she sat in Eli's room for the first time in years. The ceiling glowed with old plastic stars. The race car sheets still smelled faintly of soap and dust. She placed the hat on his pillow, then sat in the doorway, like a guard. What did it mean? Why was it here? How did it get there? She couldn't sleep, so instead, she peeled back more of the wall. Behind the drywall was more than she expected. Old plastic army men, a shoelace, a child's drawing water damaged, wrinkled at the edges of a tree with 2 stick figures, and a sun smiling in the corner. In crayon Mom Plus Me in Ars, she didn't remember this one, but she knew who made it. Joanna didn't go back to the basement the next morning. She wanted to. She meant to. But something in her chest clenched every time she reached for the cellar door. Like her body already knew what her mind hadn't caught up with. Like it was guarding her, or warning her. So she cleaned the kitchen instead. scrubbed the grout between the tiles, tossed out expired condiments, took the trash out twice. The hat sat on the dining table, still damp from the wall, resting atop an old dish towel, like something sacred. Every time she looked at it, her stomach knotted tighter. That patch, the little bear he'd picked out himself after losing the blue cap on the river trail, looked too new. The stitching shouldn't have survived. Not after all this time. Unless someone had kept it. That night, she sat in the living room, Light's low fingers wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea she hadn't sipped. The house ticked quietly. Wind tapped against the window pane. She watched the shadows shift across the hardwood and tried not to think about the hat, but the wall tugged at her, not with sound, with silence. She walked down slowly. The air grew colder with every step, like the house was holding its breath. The basement light flickered, then steadied. Dust hung in the air like ash. She stood in front of the torn drywall for a long time before reaching for the edge. The drawing was still there. So were the army men. But her eyes caught something she hadn't seen before. A faint outline behind the insulation. Rectangular, roughly shoulder height. She pulled the last of the cotton away. It wasn't just a wall. It was a door. Or rather, it had once been one. Painted the same color as the drywall. No knob. Just a smooth wooden plank with tiny nails hammered flush into the frame, dozens of them, as though someone had gone to great lengths to make it disappear. Joanna's hand trembled as she touched it. Why would anyone seal a door shut like that? And who even knew it was there? The blueprints of the house didn't show anything. The other side of the wall should be earth. Old stone and soil. No room. No crawl space. But her gut told her otherwise. She fetched a crowbar. The nails shrieked when they came loose. Wood splintered. Dust exploded into her face. And behind the old fake door was black, not darkness. Black. As if light didn't want to enter, she stood there, crowbar in one hand, phone flashlight in the other. Her breath fogged in the cold that poured from the space beyond the door. It smelled like wet earth, like rust, like old cloth and stale memories. The beam of her phone landed on steps, wooden, descending. The crawl space was bigger than she thought, deeper than she thought. She swallowed, heart pounding so loud she felt it in her teeth. She should call someone. She should wait. She should do anything but go in. But she did. 10 steps down. A sudden slope in the air. The sound of water dripping from somewhere unseen. And then a room. Bare walls. Dirt floor. No windows. And in the far corner, a small pile of objects. Plastic, fabric, metal. She stepped closer. One rain boot. A flashlight. Dead. A juice box. Molded through. And something else. Something small and square wrapped in cloth. She crouched. Pulled the cloth back. It was a cassette tape. Labeled in shaky black ink. Play Me Mom. Joanna froze. It was his handwriting. Or something close enough to send ice down her spine. The letters were crooked. But she remembered how the M dipped low, just like his always did when he wrote her name on birthday cards. She cradled the tape like it might vanish, and then she cried. Not the loud kind, not the body-shaking sobs she'd done all those years ago. This was quiet, shallow, endless, like the sound of someone remembering how to hurt again. She walked out backward, one step at a time, didn't seal the door, didn't look back. She placed the cassette on the table beside the hat, turned off all the lights, and sat in the dark. Joanna stared at the cassette on the table. The words blurred, not from tears, but from the weight of memory. Her fingers hovered over it like it was radioactive. Part of her wanted to throw it into the fire. Another part needed to hear it. Had to. What would it sound like? Static. A prank. His voice. 17 years had passed. 17 birthdays. 17 Christmas mornings, with one stocking always left hanging just in case. The voice she heard in her dreams had softened over time, like a photograph left too long in the sun. Could it really be him? And if it was, what would he say? She went to the attic, not because it made sense, but because instinct told her the tape deck would be there, the old brown one Eli used when he recorded silly songs or copied stories off the radio. It was under a blanket beside the camping gear, still intact, still dusty, still real. She brought it downstairs and placed it on the table beside the hat and tape like she was setting a dinner place for a ghost. Her hand trembled as she pressed the cassette into the slot. She hesitated at the play button and then pressed. Click. A soft hiss, then static, then silence, then a voice. Hi, Mom. Her breath stopped. I don't know if this will work. I don't know if you'll ever hear it, but I'm trying. It was his voice, young, but tired, shaken. She clutched the edge of the table. They said I wasn't supposed to talk, that if I did, they'd take away the flashlight again. Her mouth fell open. A chill ran through her chest. But I remembered what you said about stories being louder than silence. So I'm telling this, even if no one listens. Joanna's heart cracked. The voice trembled now. I miss you. I'm scared. It's cold down here. There's a hole in the wall, and I can hear them walking upstairs. I don't think they know about it. A rustle, a breath, and then as though speaking into his own heartbeat, there's another kid. I think he's been here a long time. Joanna hit pause. Her hands were shaking too hard. She gasped, pulled herself upright, paced the kitchen. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't make a sound. The words just echoed inside her. I don't think they know about it. There's another kid. Who was they? And how could this have been hidden? For years, she stared at the cassette player, then hit play again. If you find this, I left it in the place where the stars don't shine. Joanna blinked. Stars. By the old room, where the ladder used to be. I hope you remember. A sound in the background muffled shuffling footsteps. He gasped. I have to go. I'm sorry. I love you. Don't stop looking. Click. Silence. The tape had ended. Joanna didn't move. She sat there until the world started moving again. Until the kitchen clock ticked loudly enough to remind her that time hadn't stopped with the tape. She wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, then stood. He was alive, or at least he had been, and he'd left her a trail. She just had to follow it. The sun had set by the time Joanna returned to the basement. The tape sat where she'd left it silent, now a relic of something both unbearable and sacred. She held it in her hand again, turning it over, like it could still whisper more. Where the stars don't shine. That was the clue. His clue, and she did remember. The ladder, it had been years ago, back when Joanna's parents still owned the house. The attic had no stairs, then just an old rope ladder that dropped from a square hatch. Eli used to call it the sky hole. Every night before bed, he'd beg her to let him climb it one more time. She could still hear his giggle as he swung from the beams like a monkey. She could still see the tiny flashlight bouncing in his hand, cutting across the dark. When the new owners renovated, they'd sealed it off, laid new flooring over the hatch, and turned the old ladder space into insulation. Joanna's knees went weak. Was that what he meant? She ran upstairs. The hall was darker than it should have been. Shadows seemed too long, the silence pressing too tight. She grabbed the flashlight, crossed the hallway barefoot, and stopped outside the guest room, the one directly beneath where the attic ladder used to hang. She pressed her palm to the ceiling. Wood, but not solid. She knocked. Hollow. Joanna backed up, pulled over the old bookcase, and climbed it like a woman half her age. The beam of the flashlight danced over the ceiling. There, a faint outline, barely visible beneath the new paint. A hatch. Her hands trembled as she reached up, fingers slipping along the edges. Then a catch. The panel shifted with a loud groan. Dust rained down, and a scent she couldn't describe spilled from the gap part, old pine part, mold part. Something she didn't want to name. She steadied her breath, then climbed through. The attic was colder than it should have been, not just because of the temperature, but the feeling. Like time had stopped up there. The air tasted still, too still. Her flashlight beam moved across insulation boards, storage boxes. Spiderwebs clung to the rafters like veins. Then she saw it. A piece of cloth nailed to the far wall. Not big, just enough to cover something up. She stepped closer, heart pounding. The cloth was faded blue, a bedsheet maybe. It fluttered slightly, even though no air moved. She reached up, pulled it aside, and behind it, a message, scrawled in crayon across the boards in a child's handwriting. If you see this, I'm still here. Joanna's breath caught. Her knees nearly buckled. She read it again and again, as though her brain refused to accept it. Below the message, a line of drawings, simple, childlike. A house, a stick figure family, a tiny boy holding hands with a tall woman, and something else. A dark shape in the corner, not labeled, not explained, just there, watching. Joanna didn't realize she was crying until her flashlight blurred. Her fingers gripped the wall. Her nails dug into the wood. He had been up here. He'd left her this, the cassette, the message. He was trying to be found. Even now, she climbed back down in silence. The house felt different, as though the air had changed, like it knew something had been uncovered. She walked slowly to the living room, sat on the couch, closed her eyes. Eli's voice rang in her ears. I'm still here. Joanna barely slept. She lay on the couch with the flashlight beside her, replaying the message over and over in her mind. If you see this, I'm still here. That wasn't past tense. That wasn't goodbye. That was present. That was a boy, speaking from somewhere he believed he still might be found. She woke before sunrise and went back to the attic, not to find another message, but to find the place where he might have been, or might still be. She ran her hands along the floorboards. They were uneven in spots, but she'd never thought much of it. Old houses creak. Wood shifts. But one panel just left of the message gave under her touch. Soft. She pressed. It shifted. She wedged her fingers into the gap and pulled. A section of the floor lifted like a trapdoor. But inside wasn't insulation, or pipes, or wires. It was space, a pocket, a crawl cavity between the ceiling of the guest room and the attic floor. Her breath fogged as she leaned into it. The flashlight beam caught it instantly, a small worn blanket. A cracked plastic dinosaur. A juice box flattened with age. A hiding place. A child's hiding place. She lowered her head further in. Her voice caught in her throat. There along the wooden beams were tiny notches, like tally marks. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. The flashlight flickered over something shiny in the corner. A toy soldier, its paint chipped, still standing. Joanna touched it reverently, and then saw something else. Paper. Crinkled, shoved between two slats. She slid it out. A folded note. She unfolded it carefully. The paper thin as onion skin, edges frayed. It read, "Don't trust the man who brings cookies." Her heart dropped. What? She stood in the attic for several minutes, frozen. The man who brings cookies. There were only a few people who visited the house during that time. the handyman, the neighbor, Mr. Deeks. Mr. Deeks, her father's friend, the retired school janitor, always smiling, always bringing over a tin of cookies for the little guy. Her stomach turned. No, she refused to jump to conclusions. But Eli's handwriting was there. His words. His warning. 17 years too late. Or maybe just in time. Joanna took the note and the toy soldier downstairs. She placed them beside the hat and cassette. An altar of fragments, each one a breadcrumb. Eli had left them. All of them. For her. And now, maybe for justice. By now, Joanna wasn't sure what day it was. She moved through the house like it was made of glass, every step slow, every memory sharp. The cassette, the attic message, the crawl space, the toy soldier, and now the note. But something was missing. Sound, not just Eli's voice from a single tape. Something more. Something recorded. That's when she remembered the toy. It wasn't just a dinosaur. It was one of those cheap cassette recorders built into a plastic toy, the kind you squeezed to play back a voice or held up to your own mouth like a microphone. Eli used to carry it around like a walkie-talkie. Joanna ran back upstairs. This time, she didn't flinch. She dropped to her knees by the crawl space, crawled in deeper, and found it. Worn, dirty, but real. A red and blue toy recorder, shaped like a robot. She pulled it out carefully. Dust clung to it like lint. She pressed the button. Nothing. Dead. She brought it downstairs, cleaned the battery contacts with vinegar and a toothbrush, slid in 2 new AAs from the junk drawer. The little red light blinked once, then green. She closed her eyes, held her breath, and pressed play. Static. Then, a voice. It's Tuesday, I think. Joanna's chest collapsed. It was Eli. Still no one. I heard steps last night. I don't think they were yours, Mommy. I think it was him. Joanna's hand covered her mouth. I'm okay. I ate the crackers. The juice is gone now. I drew a picture for you. You can see it if you ever get in the sky hole. Silence. Then the sound of a soft shaking breath. I'm not scared. I just miss you. Click. The tape stopped. She pressed it again. More static. Then new sound. Faster breathing. Rushed whispers. He tried to open the floor today. I heard him. I heard the creaking. I made no noise. I didn't breathe. Joanna gripped the recorder like a lifeline. Eli sounded older now. Days had passed. He talks to himself sometimes. I can hear him through the vent. He says your name. He says he didn't mean to. Silence. Mommy, if you ever find this, don't let him back in the house. The audio crackled, then cut. Joanna sat frozen on the kitchen floor. She was cold, not from the temperature, from the weight, the grief, the rage. Eli hadn't just vanished. He had been here, under her feet, recording messages she never heard, leaving drawings she never saw, fighting to survive in silence while the world forgot, and someone had known. The next morning, Joanna called the police. They came. They listened. They left. They said the evidence wasn't enough. A toy, a tape, a note written decades ago. It wasn't admissible. It wasn't actionable. They told her gently, kindly, that grief could look like obsession. But she knew better. She had lived 17 years with absence. This wasn't grief. This was discovery. And there was more to find. She waited until evening. She packed a flashlight, gloves, and her late father's old toolkit. And she opened the door to the basement. The air was damp and cold, the kind of cold that seemed to seep up from the foundation, not down from the sky. Like the house itself had been holding something in. The stairs creaked under her weight, each one protesting like it remembered every visit she'd made as a child. Every time she'd run laundry, every time she'd hidden here during storms. But this time, it felt different, more like trespassing, less like home. She crouched at the base of the stairs, scanning the concrete walls. Most of them were untouched, except one. One wall had a series of strange lines running along its base, almost like it had been cut, then resealed. She knelt beside it, touched the seam. Dust flaked off. She pressed her ear against the cold silence. Then a faint sound. Drip, drip, water, or something else. Her pulse quickened. She stood and walked the length of the wall. Each step echoed too loud. The flashlight beam caught something. A small hinge, low to the ground, behind an old shelf. She pulled the shelf aside, wood scraping against concrete. There it was, a small panel, locked, no visible handle. She stared at it, hands shaking, then reached into her pocket. She pulled out the tiny brass key she'd found in her father's toolbox all those years ago. The one he said opened nothing. It slid into the lock, clicked. The panel opened. Behind it, a narrow passage, crawl space, dirt floor, cobwebs, and dark. It was barely 2 feet high, just enough for a child to crawl through, just enough for a boy to hide. She dropped to her knees, flashed the light inside. The beam traveled far, too far. The crawl space snaked along the foundation wall, disappearing into shadow. Her breath caught. She took one last look behind her, then crawled in. The crawl space was colder than the basement. Not the kind of cold that came from temperature, but the kind that seemed rooted, as though time didn't move here, as though it never had. Joanna crawled slowly, her elbows scraping along packed dirt, flashlight gripped between her teeth. The beam flickered, casting long, twitching shadows on the curved concrete walls. Cobwebs clung to her sleeves. Tiny scuttling noises echoed in the dark. She wasn't alone. But whatever else was down there, rats, spiders, memories, it didn't matter. She pressed forward. The passage curved slightly, then narrowed, then opened again, just enough for her to sit back on her heels. Her light caught something. A child's shoe, faded red canvas, torn lace. She picked it up carefully. Her thumb grazed the inside label, Eli Walker. She nearly dropped it. Her knees buckled. Her son's shoe. It had been here all these years. But why? Why here? And how? The flashlight trembled in her hand. She scanned the dirt again. Scratches. On the wall. Not words. Not symbols. Just scratch marks. Like some child had dragged their nails along the concrete over and over again. There were dozens. Some long, some short, some deep, some shallow. She reached out and touched one. It was real. This wasn't imagined. This wasn't some dream of grief. Her son had been here. He had left signs. The flashlight caught movement to her right. No, not movement. Reflection. A surface. Metal. She reached into the dirt and pulled it free. A flattened tin. Cookies. The kind Mr. Deeks always brought over in bulk for the little guy. Her stomach twisted. She wasn't imagining that part either. The note in the attic. Don't trust the man who brings cookies. Her grip on the tin tightened. She felt bile rise in her throat. This was no longer memory. This was evidence. She pushed the tin into her jacket and turned back. But something stopped her. On the opposite wall, a wooden panel, out of place in the concrete surroundings. She crawled toward it. The wood was warped, damp, but not old. She tapped it, hollow. Then she found the edges. A door, another one. She pulled. Dust cascaded. It creaked open, revealing a chamber beyond the crawl space. Larger, lined with insulation. And in the corner, something that didn't belong. A stack of paper, yellowed, folded, dozens of them. Letters, all addressed the same way. Mom. Joanna stared at the stack of letters. They were bundled with old twine stained dark by years of damp and dust. The top letter had begun to peel at the edges. Her hands shook as she untied the bundle. The first one was dated August 14, 2006, 2 weeks after the picnic. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Eli's, childlike, slanted, full of misspellings, but it was his. She read the first line aloud, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Hi, Mom. I hope this gets to you." She sat on the dirt floor, her legs folded under her. The flashlight rested between her knees, its beam angled upward, throwing shadows across her face as she read. "I don't know what day it is. I don't know how long I've been here. I'm scared. But the man said, if I write to you, it might make me feel better. So I'm writing. I miss your lemonade. I miss when you read me to sleep. I miss the dog. Is Dad mad? I hope he's not mad. Please come get me." Joanna didn't realize she was crying until the paper began to blur. She wiped her cheek and kept going. Letter after letter. Some were only a few lines. Some rambled. Some asked questions she couldn't bear to answer. Will I be 12 forever? Is it Christmas yet? If I get out, can we go back to the park? Some were torn. Some were stained dirt, or tears, or worse. Each one marked time. A child's attempt to hold on to the world outside. A voice echoing through walls no one knew existed. And through it all, one name kept repeating. Mr. D brings food. Mr. D is nice when he's not drinking. Mr. D said I was special. Joanna dropped the letter. Her breath caught in her throat. Mr. Deeks, her father's friend, her son's captor. She staggered back toward the crawl space opening, heart pounding in her ears. The flashlight flickered, batteries dying. She reached the crawlway exit and burst into the basement, gasping like she'd surfaced from underwater. She clutched the letters to her chest. Each one burned in her hands like proof. She had spent 17 years thinking her son vanished in the woods, but he had been here, under their feet, writing letters she never received. That night, Joanna didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, the letters spread before her like puzzle pieces. She couldn't stop rereading them, not just for what they said, but for what they didn't. Each letter contained small details, too many to be dismissed as fantasy. The sound of the refrigerator from above, the humming pipes, the smell of baking bread. He could hear them. He had been that close. She called the police again, insisted, demanded. But by the time they arrived the next morning, the crawl space had collapsed, the wooden panel gone. A sinkhole, they said, structural decay, no safe way in. The chamber was sealed by dirt and time. But Joanna had the letters, and she had something else. Determination. She started going through old photos, picnic snapshots, neighbors in the background. Mr. Deeks smiling with his too wide grin, holding Eli's shoulders just a little too tightly. She checked timestamps, checked her old planner, checked his visits. He'd been there, over and over. After the disappearance, he stopped showing up, moved away quietly. No suspicion, no questions. He wasn't just her father's friend. He had helped with the renovations. He had sealed the crawl space. He had installed the walls. He had known. That afternoon, Joanna drove 2 towns over to the old storage yard. She still had the key to her father's old unit. Inside, leftover lumber, rusted tools, and a box of notebooks. Mr. Deeks's handwriting filled them. Some listed lumber lengths, others dates. But in the back of one, a page that made her blood run cold. 8 to 12 finished lining. No light good soundproofing. Entry behind furnace. The boy cried all night. Gave him the tin. 8:20 kids' letters drying on shelf. Said he dreamed of Mom. Asked about the dog again. 9 of best moi. 1 can't sleep. Keep hearing scratching even when I'm not there. Joanna sat in her car for a long time. The notebook trembled in her hands. She had been right. Eli hadn't been taken far. He had been hidden, kept by someone they trusted. And every single time the refrigerator clicked on, every time they stepped above the old floorboards, he had been there, underneath, waiting. She drove home and sat in the dark. The house felt different now, heavier. It no longer felt haunted. It felt complicit, as if it had conspired in its silence. And then something fell, a soft clink, from the hallway. She turned. There in the baseboard, a sliver of light, a draft. No, another panel, smaller. She knelt, pulled it free. Inside, something soft, fabric. She reached in and pulled out a baseball cap, dusty, bent, with tiny, embroidered letters on the brim. E.W. Joanna didn't sleep. Again, the cap sat on the kitchen table like a relic dust, still clinging to the brim. She hadn't washed it. Couldn't. She just stared. Her fingers brushed the stitching. E.W. His initials? 17 years, folded inside a single object. She called the police again. Told them everything. The letters. The notebook. The name. They told her to come down in the morning. File an official report. She hung up and locked every door, every window. And then sometime just before dawn, a knock. 3 times. Soft. Slow. Not frantic. Not neighborly. Just patient. She froze. Didn't move. It came again. 3 knocks and silence. She tiptoed down the hallway, heart thundering against her ribs. Each step creaked like the house was warning whoever was outside. From the peephole she saw nothing, no one. But something had been left. A package, wrapped in butcher paper, tied with twine. She didn't open the door for 10 more minutes. When she did, the porch was empty, save for the bundle. Inside, a cassette tape, a dusty Walkman, and a torn page from one of Eli's school notebooks. Mom, he says you'll hear me now. She didn't know where the old batteries came from, but she found some, slid the cassette in, pressed play. The tape crackled, then breathing, shaky, rhythmic. A child's voice whispering, "It's dark in here. I think he's gone. I think it's night. I miss you. I think I heard the dog yesterday. Maybe I'm near home. The wall's cold. But I'm not scared right now, 'cause I remember your voice." Then silence, then static, then a second voice, deeper, gravelly. "He keeps asking for you. You should have been here sooner." The tape ended. Joanna dropped it like it was hot. Her hands trembled so badly, she knocked over a chair. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She just stood there, listening to the silence. There was a man's voice on that tape. She knew it. Not a memory, not a ghost. Someone still alive. And then she remembered Deeks had a brother, lived out by the old grain mill. They used to joke about it being haunted, about how no one ever went out there anymore. And Joanna, breath shallow, grabbed her keys. The grain mill looked like it had died years ago. Its boards sagged. Its tin roof curled at the edges like paper left too close to fire. But it still stood, half swallowed by trees. Windows blinded with dirt. The giant red Walker and Deeks Millwork sign hanging crooked over the doorway, like a forgotten monument. Joanna parked her car in the brush and stepped out slowly. The wind carried the smell of wet leaves and rust. Somewhere nearby, a bird chirped, then stopped. It was too quiet. She circled the building once. Old wheel tracks still carved into the dirt. A rusted tricycle, missing its front tire, leaned against the wall coated in moss. A child's toy, or a memory. She reached the side entrance, where a corrugated steel door had been chained shut recently. New padlock, fresh scratch marks on the frame. She stepped back, heart hammering. Someone had been here, still was. Then came the smell. Sweet at first, almost syrupy, then metallic, rotting. Joanna covered her nose, pressed forward, found a broken window near the loading dock, high but climbable. She used an old milk crate to pull herself up, grunting, slipping, catching herself, and inside silence, dust motes, cobwebs, and something else. A sound, faint, like humming, or maybe breathing. The floor creaked beneath her boots. It echoed too far, like the building was hollow, alive. A row of storage rooms stretched along the far wall, some open, some sealed. One door, heavy and rust-stained, had a chain lock hanging loose beside it. She reached for the handle. It turned, creaked open, and inside, painted walls. Too clean, too white. A child's mural on the far side, a tree, a sun, a cartoon dog. Beneath it, a mattress, a stack of picture books, an empty water dish, and on the shelf, a tin, the one from the notebook. Joanna's knees gave out. She didn't cry, couldn't. This room was a secret someone tried to scrub away, but it still smelled like childhood, like crayon wax and fear, like silence forced too long. She walked to the mattress and crouched, fingered the fraying threads. Under the pillow, a note, folded, faded. She opened it with trembling hands. It read, "I heard you. That day in the hallway. You were crying. I tried to knock, but I was too late." Joanna didn't hear the footsteps, only the door. It creaked louder than it should have, and when she turned, he was already there, backlit in the doorway, shoulders hunched, wearing faded denim overalls caked with sawdust. His beard had thinned, but the eyes, still sharp, still too calm. "Joanna," he said, like they were meeting at church, like 17 years hadn't passed, like her son's name hadn't been buried in his bones. She stepped back, hit the wall, didn't speak, couldn't. He raised one hand, slow palm open. "No one ever came here," he said, almost gently. "Until now." She could smell oil on his skin, hear the scrape of his boot against the floor. "You left him in that room," she whispered. Her voice cracked. He didn't answer, didn't deny, just looked at her like someone watching a fire burn slow. Joanna pointed at the mattress behind her. "That was a child. A boy. You kept him like a ghost." Still, he didn't move. And then he laughed. Not loud, just a single choked sound. He never screamed, he said. Not once. Not like the others. The room spun. The tape. The letters. The hat. Eli's voice. "I miss you. I think I'm near home. I'm not scared right now, 'cause I remember your voice." Joanna clutched the note tighter in her fist. "You're going to confess," she said. "You're going to walk out that door and tell the police what you did." The man in the overalls smiled. Not wide, just knowing. "You think that's how it works?" he asked. "You think the truth fits in a box like that?" He stepped forward. She didn't back away. She didn't cry. She raised her voice louder now. "You took my son." He blinked, tilted his head, and whispered, "I saved him." Joanna's fingers dug into the note in her palm until it tore. The man didn't flinch, didn't explain, just stood there, like the air between them didn't vibrate, with 17 years of silence. "You saved him?" she asked again, her voice breaking. "From what?" He exhaled slowly, like someone finishing a thought, then gestured to the walls around them, to the world. The room was cold now. Joanna could feel it in her bones, a heaviness like grief, pressing down from the ceiling. In the far corner, beneath the mural of the cartoon dog, was something she hadn't seen before, a panel in the wall slightly ajar. Her heart climbed into her throat. She stepped toward it slowly. Behind her, the man didn't move, just watched, like he wanted her to see. She opened the panel. Inside, darkness, dust, and something else. A small stuffed bear, worn at the edges, its eye missing, a red thread still stitched across the belly. Eli. Joanna gasped, the kind of gasp that empties a person. She pulled it out like it was glass, afraid it might shatter, held it to her chest, and suddenly everything came back. That last morning, Eli running through the grass barefoot, holding that bear by the ear, asking if they could bring it to the picnic. She'd said no. He'd snuck it anyway. And then a sound behind her, not loud, just the floor creaking. She turned. The man was gone. The door now stood open. The hallway stretched long and dark. She ran harder than she had in years. Her lungs burned. The stairwell twisted like something out of a nightmare. Every shadow whispered something she didn't want to hear. By the time she reached the main room again, he was gone. No footprints, no car, just cold air and silence. She fell to her knees beside the open door, clutched the bear, the cassette, the note. This was all she had left of Eli. And yet, it was more than before. It was something. It was him. The news never broke. There were no headlines, no trial, no mugshot on TV. The man in the overalls vanished the same way he'd entered the story, quietly in the corner of a frame no one noticed until it was too late. But Joanna knew. She had the bear. She had the tape. And most of all, she had her son's voice. In the weeks that followed, authorities reopened the case. They searched the mill. They found evidence, fingerprints, clothing fibers, journal scraps. But the man was gone. No trace. No known relatives. Just an empty workshop behind a shuttered house 4 towns over, where tools still hung in perfect rows. And a coffee cup sat half drunk on the bench. Inside the house, they found boxes of photos. Children. Dozens. Smiling. Playing. And always watching. Eli's photo was there too. 17 years old. Taken just weeks before the family picnic. Smiling. Looking off to the side like someone had called his name. He had no idea what was coming. That was the hardest part. Joanna didn't return to the mill. She didn't have to. Some things are better left behind, not forgotten, but set down. She turned Eli's room into something new. A place where light came through the windows. She placed the bear on the shelf, hung his hat near the door, framed the note, and every morning she played the tape once. Just the first 30 seconds, enough to hear his breath, his voice, his hope. Mom, I'm okay. I remember your voice. They buried an empty box in the backyard. It didn't have a body, but it had everything else. And when the neighborhood kids asked, she simply said, "That's where my son grew up." She lived the rest of her life with a quiet ache, not a scream, but a hum. The kind of hum that filled empty rooms and cool mornings. The kind of hum that came from memory. And sometimes on clear days, when the wind pushed through the house just right, she swore she could hear Eli laugh somewhere near the east window, the one that always caught the morning sun.